Well, welcome back to Return to Yehovah. This is another one of those where I'm on the road and thought I might try to share something. We'll see how it works. Part of the time I have to put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. Anyhow, I had a brother, one of our good brothers from Germany, comment that it would be nice to have some practical ways people could keep the Torah, and I mean, I agree, and I think those of us that have been doing this for a while, we've kind of come up with our own ways, and I don't think any of us do it all the same way. Some people are part of a group, and the group has its own rules, whether whatever they may be, Messianics or Hebrew roots or some kind of Torah observant group or whatever. And I guess eventually, if you're a group of believers, you got to come to some, basic things that you all agree on. And that's tough. You might have read in some comments or heard in some of my other videos that I used to be part of a pretty good sized home fellowship. I wasn't running it, I was just one of the members, and it was really good for several years, probably 6 or 8 good sized families. Everybody got along good. We used to get together for meals at times, and every Saturday evening we'd have Havdalah and do like a potluck, and we'd get together and eat and fellowship, and then get into the Word, and we'd actually discuss it and everything, and it was really good for a long time. But then over time, different outside ideas or false teaching started creeping in, and some people were like, that kind of sounds good, I think I'll do that, or I'll follow that, and it led to a lot of us not being able to come together maybe on a feast day or whatever, because we didn't agree with certain things that others were doing, and really made it tough. And so I am not one who's going to dictate to you or anybody, we've got to do this. I mean, yes, there's things that I agree with or I think are correct, but God hasn't spoken to me from a mountain or from a burning bush, so I'm just another guy that, has my opinion, and I try to base it on Scripture, but doesn't mean I got it all figured out. So, that being said, the reason I wanted to say something on this video is I was thinking about, okay, how can we, live out the Torah? And one thing that came to mind, I'm not going to have it all figured out in this one video, okay? But we all know that there's different passages throughout the Bible, especially in the New Testament also, that encourage you or command you to take care of widows and orphans. And I actually thought, a few years ago, it's like, my gosh, I don't know any orphans. I don't even know if there's an orphanage around, and I actually looked online for a while and I couldn't find anything in our country. Now, there may very well be some, but I just didn't find any. So I thought, well, Lord, what am I going to do? And I didn't necessarily. It's not like there's a group of widows that have a website or whatever. But it dawned on me, and you probably have already thought of this, but there are people around us. For example, on my street, the little road that I live on, there's at least one, if not a couple of widows there, different ages. And it doesn't mean you have to take meals to them all the time or whatever. The one I'm thinking of actually works. Her kids are, old enough age that they're helpful around the house and everything. But I also know that if she was to need help or be in trouble or whatever, that my family and I would definitely not refuse to help her. I mean, and if we can help, I mean, some people, depending on where you live, like in the Pacific Northwest and all, a lot of people kind of do their own thing, and they feel like, they don't ask for help, a lot of people. But that's just one example. So kind of what I'm saying is, or thinking is, there's nothing that says you have to, or that the way to be obedient in this realm is to send money to orphans in another country far away or whatever. There's nothing wrong with it, and that may very well be the best you can do, and God knows they need the help. But I kind of feel like in the modern church, at least in the West, we look at trying to love our neighbor as ourselves. I don't think we really know how to do that, and we more look to overseas missions or helping, like I said, orphanages in other countries or things like that, and we feel good about what we've done if we've sent them some money or something like that. But meanwhile, you might have people right down the road from you that are in need, maybe had a horrible thing happen and one of the parents was killed or something like that. And I think there's more to it than just bringing a meal after a funeral or things like that. So again, I don't have I'm sure not going to give anybody a commandment or a directive, but we need to kind of think of things around us, and you may not have an occasion every single day to help somebody, but this idea of loving your neighbor isn't confined to just the people in your neighborhood per se. Like I'm going to be driving down the road here, and and I might actually lose my wiper blade. It looks like I'll have to deal with that. But anyhow, when I started thinking about keeping the commandments or keeping the Torah and wanting to find a way to help my neighbor or love my neighbor by doing things, I noticed that sometimes there'd be somebody broken down on the side of the road, and I am not a mechanic by any means, but I would try to, if possible, get over there and help them. Maybe they just needed a phone call made and to get some help coming or things like that. But I guess all I'm saying is there's practical things that we can each do. Now, I wrote some things down, but of course, since I'm driving, I can't really look at them. One thing that I thought was worth noting was the idea that even if, let's say, you're a neighbor or a former coworker or somebody that just really hates you. We've probably all got people that despise us for one reason or another. Sometimes we don't even realize it. But if you've got a person, whether they're a fellow believer or not, that really doesn't like you, and you see that they're in need sometime, like maybe broken down on the side of the road, or maybe, you name it, something where you see they could use some help, don't just turn away and say, I'm not going anywhere near them because they hate me or I hate them, And I realize this is probably all very common sense to all of you. You probably have all figured this out, but I'm just felt like I ought to share some of this. But there's a verse in the New Testament that talks about, it kind of gives the impression that if you were to help someone, even if they hate you, you will be heaping coals, like coals of judgment on their heads. And to me, the Torah does not say anything like that. I mean, it doesn't encourage us to do it just for that reason. Okay, so if you see somebody and they really don't like you and you really can help them, at least offer. There's no harm in that. And if they, call you names or cuss at you or are rude to you, then, that's okay. At least you'd offered, but at least they'll know, wow, well, that guy actually offered to help me, even though he knows I don't like him. that's got to have some kind of impact on a person. But again, don't do it just be. And I just can imagine this from years ago at some of the churches I belong to, where I can think of some of the people I've known in churches, and they would be like, well, yep, I'm going to do it, and he's going to have coals on his head. And obviously that wasn't the point of that passage, but yeah, that's not a reason. That's not a godly reason to do that. Well, I realize a lot of this is probably very common sense to you guys, and what I didn't realize by driving, I don't have access to some of the things I had jotted down, but I have to pull over anyhow, so I'm gonna see if I can look at those real quick. Yeah, so bear with me just a second here. And sometimes, again, these, I know I may be preaching to the choir, but since somebody asked if I could come up with some practical ways, just as you go, you might go to the market or a store or something, and there's maybe a little old lady that's having trouble pushing her cart, or could use help lifting something heavy to put it into her car, or things like that. If you're physically able, by all means help her. And unlike I used to hear in some of the churches I belonged to in the past, don't look at it as an opportunity to preach the gospel or to ask them if they're saved or that kind of thing. I mean, if that's your thing, okay. But what I'm saying is, the Torah is about us living it out, not using every opportunity to preach at somebody or something like that, because I think we're led to believe that the only works that count in this life, because we all know from the New Testament and other places that works of righteousness, count for something in the end, in judgment time or whatever. And a lot of us have been led to believe that means, how many souls you saved, or how many people you brought to church that eventually became believers, or things like that. And my God, that is not what the Bible teaches at all, okay? I mean, there may be value to those things, but God has given us His commandments, His statutes and judgments, and if you just take away any of those that involve an animal sacrifice, or anything that a priest has to do in the temple, or anything that you would have to do at a temple, you just separate those things out, since we don't have a priesthood right now, in Jerusalem, and a temple there standing to function in that manner. God removed that for His reasons, for His purposes. So since that's not there, you can't do those commandments anyhow. But we know this idea of love your neighbor as yourself is absolutely the spirit of the law, okay? A lot of times we learn, the letter of a law, whatever it may be, like do this or don't do that. But we don't necessarily look into why did God say that, or, why? And, I mean, obviously I can't cover all that right now, but if you, if you think of it as, just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We've all heard that all our lives in church or whatever. And sometimes, I mean, it is just another way of saying love your neighbor as yourself. And so I guess a good way to say it, try to put it in modern terms or whatever, is, don't do something to somebody else that if you were them, you would not like. That's one way of thinking of it. But also, for example, if I was broken down, now I'm on the side of the road, I'm not broken down, but if I was, and maybe I was injured and I didn't know my phone was broken or whatever, it would be nice to have somebody stop by and offer to help. Maybe I've got the phone, maybe I'm good, I'm just stopping to do a video, And I'm not hoping that somebody stops by right now, but do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't hurt you a lick to stop and offer help. And if you can really help, it's a good thing. Another thing I thought of, when I was a new believer, I remember I didn't have a lot of money. There was times where I didn't have a job or whatever, but young guy, and if I had to go somewhere or wanted to, a lot of times I'd hitchhike, depending on where it was. And I won't go into all the long story behind that, but there was quite a few times I'd be walking along and like, just, I didn't know any better, but I would pray, oh Lord, I pray you'd, send somebody to give me a lift or whatever. And at the time I was living on an island down in the Virgin Islands, and sometimes it was somebody on a moped. I mean, believe it or not, and there was room for me on the back, so off we went, motoring down, and different times, different people. I'm not saying it happened hundreds of times, but plenty of times. But each time I prayed and somebody came along, I was like, oh, thank you, God. I mean, that built my faith as a new believer, okay, or as a young, because I was a young new believer. And then later, after I'd been one for several years, or even 4 or 5, I would see somebody walking, let's say, on a road, and it's pouring rain and stuff. And now sometimes if I had like my little boy as a baby in the car, or maybe my wife or whatever, I would have erred on the side of caution and maybe not done that. Each of you has to decide, when it's safe and when it's not for you, okay? But I remember one time I was still pretty young and young in the faith, and there was a guy, and you would have thought he was somebody out of like either a cult or that kind of stepped out of the pages of the Bible. He was young and scruffy, but he had like a tunic or some kind of thing on, and he was not a Muslim guy. There were no Muslim people in America that I ever came across around those days. But just a guy kind of hitchhiking down the road, and I don't even remember if he had a staff or not, but I pulled over and, gave him a ride wherever he was going. I think I lived in Florida at the time. I'm not sure, but I don't remember much about the conversation, but he seemed like a decent guy, and I think all I had to offer him, I didn't have a lot of money, but I had half of a sandwich or something like that, so I gave him that. I could tell he was hungry, and I don't even know if I had anything to drink. But anyhow, all I'm saying is, it was just a guy, that needed a lift, and who knows, maybe he prayed that God would send somebody, and I got to be that somebody, but I didn't know. I wasn't privy to that conversation. It's just all part of things we can do as we're able, to help somebody that needs it. But, the way the guy was dressed and everything, and I don't remember where I dropped him off or what happened after I did or whatever, but the thought sure went through my head, wonder if that's one of those entertaining angels unaware. We've all heard that in the scripture, and I don't have the verse handy. If I think of it, I'll put it down the description below, but you never know. I mean, I'm not saying he was. I really have no idea. Sometime I'll tell you the story when I was in Morocco, and dummy me got lost, and 2 guys, well, I'm telling it right now. So I'm in Marrakesh, never been in the country, but, for a couple of days with a group of people. We got done with lunch. They all went one way. I was a few minutes behind them, thought they went the other way, so I was following them. And I'm this, lone American, single Christian guy in a 99.9% Muslim country. And, it was a couple years after 9/11, so who knows what the mindset was of the people. But here I am walking in the, in this part of town or whatever, and all of a sudden 2 guys came walking up to me and, offered to, where are you trying to go or whatever. And I remember through my mind I was thinking, this could go bad, but I also wasn't totally, scared or whatever. But they ended up, I told them I was trying to get to the market or whatever, and they said, oh, you don't want to go this way. Turn around and go that way. And of course, so I was like, oh, thank you, and off I went. And part of me wonder if that's the truth. What if they're leading me in the wrong direction? You see things in movies and all that. But by the time, I followed the way they said, I met up with my group, everything was fine. And it was later that it dawned on me, it's like, those two guys might have been a couple of angels. Like God probably looked down and thought, that knucklehead is going to get himself killed. He's going the wrong way and not a good place or whatever. So, these two guys just showed up. I don't remember a language barrier at all. I don't know what they spoke, but I understood them and sent me in the right direction. So that I just consider that my little angels in Morocco story. Who knows if it was, but thank you, Lord, for getting me in the right direction. So even something like that, giving somebody, and they may have been just a couple of regular guys that just gave somebody directions. So all of these are things we can do. Just love your neighbor, whoever that may be, whoever you might stumble across. Put yourself in their shoes. I mean, if you see somebody begging for money, now in America, there's a lot of that going on, a lot of homelessness, and a lot of the people that are homeless will tell you they choose to be because they like it. I don't know what the attraction is other than the freedom and all that, but and I've had a guy tell me one time that he made more money standing on a corner just getting donations from people than he ever did working as a chef in a restaurant. Now, that was several years ago, but I thought, my God, that's kind of a tough trade-off, but that's what he said. That was the truth, But, there's times where, we see people asking for money left and right, and I've had times where I go to give somebody money and they take more than I was going to, like they grab it out of my hand and stuff like that, so you just never know. And there are people that are scammers and that are, not honest at all, but every once in a while, I know one time I gave a guy just like $5 and he was so happy. He says, oh, I can eat today. And I thought, oh my God, $5 was not hurting me at all at the time. And yet this guy was excited because he was going to get to have some food, So, I mean, all these little things, they're not the be all and end all for how to love your neighbor, but just some of my thoughts for today about how to, something to think about. Okay. So maybe you've done all these things and more. You may all be doing way more than I ever do in keeping the Torah. And it's not about what I've done. I mean, these are just ideas of things I've remembered or that people have done for me. Okay. So, anyhow, I guess that's all for now. I'm going to close for now, and I guess we'll come back next time. But Yehovah bless you and keep you. Shalom.